Hey guys, just wanted to talk to you a little bit before I lay down for the day. Some of you are new here. There's hundreds of you that are new here. When I finally started pushing for these children and coming forward and kind of talking more about the situations at hand and how you have to deal with certain things and put pressure on uh, CPS, DCFS, Catholic Charities, the different police organizations and stuff like that in order to get these children help, because sometimes people that are put in play are either bottom of the barrel, they have agendas, or they really don't care about the situation, or they're actually friends with the family. So some things to think about is, once you do get that child help, what are the steps that you would take to help that child progress in the next direction? You can't just go from abuse and then all of a sudden expect everything to go away. There are some things that follow. There's some steps that the child has to go through, and you're going to have to be willing to do those things at that child's level. It's not going to be something where you can just rush into a child's life and say, okay, everything's fine now, you're safe, and they're just going to believe that. There has to be some kind of order at which you prove that. And with a child being as delicate as they are, if you catch the abuse early on, they may latch onto the savior, the parent, the guardian, whatever you will, early on, and you can expedite that healing early on. But if it's something that's been going on for a long period of time, or it's been traumatic, there's things that you can't do. You can't force certain things. And I never ask people to suppress emotions. I never ask people to hide things. But whenever you're dealing with a child and they're coming out of a very abusive state, and you're trying to help them heal, you're not forcing them, you're not fixing what's wrong with them. They have to fix that themselves through the therapy that's given to them in order for these things to go away. They'll never completely go away, but they can heal. And the process of healing is very important, because this is what's going to grow that relationship between you and them even better. Now, we've had a few instances pop up lately all over the country, and I think the more pressure that we put on child trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and we start spreading more and more awareness on what's going on in these homes, there's a lot of things that people don't understand that's going on. There's a lot of things that are happening all over the world that people don't understand that are going on. And I just want to go over some basic stuff that I wrote down that was on the top of my mind, that helped me coming out of my abusive state. First, let me I'm doing pretty good. I'm level-headed. A lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and the one thing that I can make an impact on, that I know for sure that I can help change, is the abusive state that this country's in, that our children are dealing with, and that other human beings are kind of contributing to society, doing to other people. So I'm at a point in my life right now where I kind of push everything else aside, put my life on hold, and realize that this is where I need to be. So um, I was gonna say something before that. Uh, Before I get into these like recovery steps of what I thought, I just want to let you know these are my opinions. I'm not an expert in this matter. Uh, One of the most critical things that we have to understand is, you can't take one trauma experience and compare it to another trauma experience. So you take somebody like me. I'm going to highlight some points. They're graphic. Um, and then I'm going to compare it to something else. And then you're going to see exactly what I say, or what I mean when I say this. My abuse started early on, at 4 or 5 years old. That abuse was where I started to get actually beat. Um, when I say beat, it wasn't a whooping. I was being hit with things, objects, and that turned into, um, by 6 and 7 years old, being held down, hands tied, feet tied, stuff like that, and just beat whenever they felt like doing it, because that's how they were taking their drug reaction, drug addiction, anger for whatever was going on in their life out on me, and I was the pinata. So by the time I was 7 and 8 years old, this turned into more of a torturing type thing where I would be stuck in the corner of a kitchen, and they would take kitchen knives and they would throw it at me like I was a dartboard. And I have scars all over my body from this. Um, when I was like 9 and 10 years old, it got into more severe type punishment. It was tied up, hung over the end of a bed, being recorded on video, humiliated, um, defecating on me, beating me with objects. It was to a point of complete, total human humiliation. And then by the time I was 12 and 13 years old, these are with these are where the massive wounds and stuff started coming in. The scars that I have all over my head, my body, my legs, um, beat for hours on end until there was blood coming out of my back, my ass, the back of my legs, and I would have to sleep on my belly for weeks and sometimes not even being able to get out of bed. So taking trauma like that, and then later on in life, going into foster care, 9 different foster homes, going off to the military, seeing everything that I seen, 15 months deployed to a war zone, coming home, getting married, getting divorced, and finding out the woman that I was married to only married me for citizenship, and then losing everything several times throughout my life until finally, 4 or 5 years ago, I stabilized and I started to become. It was that switch that flipped inside my head, and everything started to come together, and I feel like God was starting to really work in me. Now, am I the best Christian? I'm not. I'm a sinner. I'm not a Bible thumper. I don't go to church all the time and stuff like that, but I'm a believer. I was saved. I was baptized in the middle of a war zone in a building that was confiscated from Al Qaeda that we took over, and I was baptized in this terrorist building in the name of the Father. So my life is a little different than most people. I could take my trauma and say, my trauma is worse than everybody else in the world. I've dealt with some of the most severe situations that anybody could ever imagine going through. I could tell you that, and I could point my finger and say, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. I want you to feel bad for me. I want you to just know that I'm the worst case in the entire world. People have died from this. I didn't die. People have lost their physical limbs because of torture and stuff. People have been outsourced as sex slaves and stuff like that, starting as children. I was raped twice, and in the process of starting that, the guy was caught both times, but I wasn't that severe case that ended up leading to a physical altering impairment. Mine is all basically mental now. I see my teeth every single day. That's because I would get beat in the mouth. She would hit me in the mouth with objects, and my teeth were all screwed up. The military fixed some of them, but it wasn't because I didn't take care of myself. It was because she got off on that kind of stuff. Well, when I look at everything that happened to me, it's a mental thing now. So I had to learn to become mentally strong, to focus on my therapy more on a mental standpoint and not so much about physical challenges in my life, because I wasn't one of those severe situations. Now, I can't take my trauma and go compare it to Sophie's or Sloane's. Say their name. It's important because these people matter. The trauma that they could experience one time, being raped as a child, that one time that trauma could have, that Sophie could have experienced, or something happened to her, just that one instant that it happened the first time, could be so much trauma. I'll get it. I don't want to veer off my train of thought right now, but when I finish this, I will go back to your comment and I'll address it. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if I veer off, then I lose track and kind of get jumbled, and then I got to backtrack and stuff. So I can't take one child's trauma and compare it to another child's trauma. I can't take mine and compare it to another one and say mine was worse. Because how I dealt with my trauma and my impurities was, as I dealt with a more severe situation, it almost seems like the situation before was masked by the more powerful situation. So I was already over that. So I was already ready for the next level of severity. These children, it could happen one time, it could have happen multiple times the same thing. But that level of trauma that they're dealing with is probably at the same rate as somebody's, you know, physical impairment that happened during a trauma event. And you can't look at somebody and say my trauma was worse than yours. They still a lot of times get treated the same way, and a lot of people don't realize that. Just because, I was in a war zone and I dealt with all these situations and stuff where my life was, my life was at stake, doesn't mean that my life is any more traumatic or holds any more meaning than a police officer in a busy city that has to be out on the beat every single day. It's still kind of considered a war zone. People go through trauma that almost they go through life thinking, well, I had it worse than you. Well, your level of understanding what worse is may not be so, because somebody else may have felt exactly like you did with something substantially less. So that level of trauma is still the same. We can't compare. We have to look at each situation individually. And I think as a society and the systems that we have in place, they're too mainstream. They look at everything inside a box, and they try to address these situations inside a box. And you can't do that with each person. Each person is different. And I do understand that we don't have therapists and counselors that look at things differently. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have right now, is we need to start going into these situations looking at things from a neutral standpoint, and trying to figure out what that child needs. Not what we think that they need, but let them tell us. Let them give us the cues and stuff like that. Now I'm going to address this comment real quick, and then I'm going to move on to the notes I wrote down. How do you feel about an abusive child being too exposed on social media? How will that affect their healing and future online reputation when they are old enough to explore social media themselves? So, unfortunately, and this is just the truth, this is big right now. This is in all of our faces right now. We all want to keep this alive, and we all want to continue to talk about this. But a lot of times this exposure on social media is exactly what gets this child that help. And I hope one of these children in the future see this video and say, you know what? That's probably one of the only reasons why there's so much pressure put on the system at the time, that all these hundreds of thousands of people all over the world that came together for me, and so much pressure was put on the system that I was actually looked at, and I actually got the help that I needed because of social media. There's some good and there's some bad to it. It can be embarrassing in the future. But any decent human being that will look back at this and see everything that was going on in the year 2020, for one, they're going to think 2020 was a screwed up year anyway, so it was whatever happened. But they're going to probably look back at this and see, this was a time when social media was really starting to expose things. They're probably going to have a completely different understanding than me, and how me and you see it. If I was to go ask my grandma about, what she thought about all this, she would probably think we were crazies for this stuff. But then I go ask my mother, and she's like, probably not the right thing to do. But my mother's 60 years old. She's close to 60, but then whenever, like right now, I don't really have a problem with it because I see the benefit in it more than my mother would. But if you notice, as these generations pass, there's some good that comes out of it as things advance and technology advances and the way we deal with things change. But there's also some things that get worse. The way we teach children respect and stuff like that in the world, the way we reprimand our children now, it seems like for a while the smack on the butt to say, hey, wake up, that's not okay, was working. But then we went through this rebellion phase whenever our fathers and mothers stopped doing it to us. And then we go right back into doing it again, and then all of a sudden it's traumatizing and tormenting children. So there's no real right or wrong answer for a lot of this stuff. You know, I don't think physical contact at all is the right way to do things, but I do find that there are some parents that can recognize with their children, it's just that cut it out. It snaps them out of it, and then all of a sudden they're done. It's not beating them, it's not hitting them or anything like that. I do recognize there's different situations for everything, but as time passes, some things become more acceptable and some don't. Social media is the thing right now, and I can only imagine by the time they become of age, they're going to look back at all this and they're going to say, thanks guys, thanks for helping me. This is what actually helped me. This is the pressure that's being put on the system so children can get help, and maybe that's what has to happen because it wasn't there before. So there are multiple ways to look at this, multiple facets to consider, you know. So the notes. I titled my notes Child Abuse Recovery Steps. These aren't really going to be exact steps. They could be guides. They're just my opinion. But I did put it in a note at the top, and I think it's very important. Through the steps of trying to help a child come out of an abusive situation, an assaultive situation, something like that, it may cause parental depression. This is a very serious issue that nobody ever talks about. This is something that's never brought up. I've never heard it brought up. I'm the first one that I know of that actually sat down while going over these notes and said, you know, say a parent's doing everything right. The guardian, the grandmother, whatever it is doing everything right, and they're going through all these steps. The child does need to go through this recovery, and you got to figure out how they want to do it and how they respond to it the best. But in the meantime, how is that parent that's taking them through all this, that's there for them, slowly walking with them, being affected by this? It may cause parental depression. And this is the one time, as I brought up earlier, I don't ask people to hide anything. But I have to ask you to hide this. When a child is going through a healing phase, they can't have an unstable foundation. And one of the most critical things that I went through when I came out of the war zone I was in as a child into a loving home was whenever people would hear about my story, whenever they would see how hard it was for me to accept certain things, they would break down. They would become depressed. Some things would be difficult on them. And during those times, it got really iffy and rocky for me whether or not I was getting the right treatment or whether or not I was really being cared for like I thought I should be, or there was just doubts that started to arise. So while a child is healing through this stuff, sometimes it takes a long time. If they don't have a stable foundation to start with, and that depression and stuff shows, and the child's not old enough to understand, if you sit down and actually communicate with them what your problem is, you know, I'm sorry, honey, I see you hurt, it makes me hurt. You know, when you feel bad and you want to cry, it makes me cry. Those types of things. If they're not old enough, they're not going to understand that. And if they're trying to go through a healing phase, sometimes in this particular situation, you may have to hide some of that. You may have to look at the silver lining in all this to acknowledge the fact that there's healing there, and that healing should make you take a step back and look at it and say, you know what, maybe I'm being this way just because I don't like seeing my child hurt. I need to wake up. I need to come out of this, because if I make whatever's going on with me right now a part of their issue, we could start setting them back. They could start taking step backs, and there's no progression forward. So that's very important to look at those things like that as well. I don't think that I would have healed as fast as I did if I didn't have a stable foundation. And there was plenty of times where I was going through different types of therapy and working on things in life where there were people around me that were not stable or insecure, and that also made me insecure and unstable, and I almost would want to rebel and not take the therapy and not do it. So there's a number of ways that you can look at that as well. I think it's very important to consider that as a parent or a guardian, while the abuse while the abusive child is healing and going through this therapy, you're going to have to hold some of that depression in. I mean, unless they're old enough to understand what's going on, and you can actually consider whether or not they're stable enough to understand that you're also going through some issues, watching them go through their issues, it's probably important to hide it a little bit or hide it completely and understand that there's a healing process going on. Maybe you can find your own type of therapy to deal with it. Talk to your girlfriend, your husband, whatever it is, a coworker that you really trust. Maybe that could be your therapy that gets you through that little phase of feeling bad while that child's healing, but that's not going to help them seeing that their foundation is cracking. I hope that makes sense, because that was a big part of my life whenever I was going through that healing. So when the abuse is over and the healing starts, what's next? There may be barriers there. They may be very tall. Those barriers may be sky high. And it almost seems like it takes forever for that child to climb over it and just say, okay, mom, okay, dad, I'm okay now. Or I'm just ready to accept whatever kind of therapy I need to do. Because they may not even be ready for it right away. They may not want nobody touching them or bothering them for a while until they've calmed themselves down and they've realized that they have to start accepting something. But how tall is that barrier? They may come to you with open arms and say, okay, the trauma didn't happen that long before. You caught it early enough. Let's fix this. Or they may be sky high and they say, you know what, I'm just not ready for this right now. I'm not ready to have new people in my life. I'm not ready to have another man therapist in my life that did these types of things to me or something like that. Those walls may be very, very high. And it's going to take a long time for them to even get up anywhere, or you to get up anywhere to get over that, for them to accept the fact that you want them to start, or they consider starting, some kind of therapy to heal. You can't force that. I mean, if they're already 14 and 15 years old and you're trying to help them then, sometimes that gets in a really, really rough spot. Especially me at 13 years old when I went into foster care, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I wanted to be left alone. I just wanted to be by myself for a little while so I could it was just a relief to not be abused and beaten stuff all the time, and living on the streets homeless. It was nice to be in a home and be cared by somebody, and that enough was for me to feel okay and safe until I was ready to start seeing other people. Thank you. I appreciate that. So when I look at children, I have to go back to what happened to me. I have to step back into my abusive past. And it gets emotional. Because if you've never been there and you don't know how that feels, it can get very, very rocky. Sometimes you have to let them tell you, and then you have to try to be the best detective in the world to figure out what they want, and it's almost impossible. It feels like you're doing everything in the world to do everything right, but it still keeps coming out wrong. Keep trying. You don't have to quit. If you quit, you may reset everything. Just keep trying. They don't want a quitter. They've had everything else quit on them for so long that when you quit, that may destroy them. It's worth the fight. It is worth the fight. So that branches off into another segment of therapy immediately. Before we go into that, I'm going to address this message. I think people need to realize the current case needed social media intervention, or Sophie would still be with her mother. It's been 12 months and they haven't believed her. I agree. I think that's a very, very good point. And I think that her looking back in the future, she's going to see, if I didn't have all these people to back me, if I didn't have all these people behind me, it wasn't working. They weren't working with Dad. They weren't working with me. I'm telling people things are going on. I would have been in that situation a lot longer. So I bet you that girl, 5 years from now, she's going to look back at all this. She's already so smart as it is. She's smart as a pistol. I mean, she's smart. She's going to look back at all this and she's going to feel like she was really, really loved. Right. I agree. The trauma she would have endured if we hadn't have stepped in social media wise is going to be nothing like what would have happened if somebody didn't do something about it. You could see that initial judge didn't want to do anything for her. She didn't seem like she really was interested in what was going on anyway. Um, the detective that was looking into things, he didn't really seem like he really wanted to be a detective. It seemed like maybe he wanted to quit his job and become a therapist, which he was a poor therapist at that. So, and I'm an advocate for police. I appreciate that. I appreciate that, everybody. I'm an advocate for police, but I'm not an advocate for bad police. And that officer was not doing his job. A lot of people think that police officers are supposed to step into this therapeutic type role, or this this role that's not being a detective. Your job is to be a detective. Your job is not to go into that father's life and give him advice about, oh, you obviously loved her at one time, so it's just as much your responsibility to make sure she gets out of that car and gets over to the mother without any of this other stuff going on. Well, how am I supposed to do that as a father, knowing that my daughter's expressing to me that somebody's doing something to her, and then I'm forced to, by the mother, hanging court orders over my head, take her here and drop her off with somebody that's abusing her? And with that situation being handled that way, the only way that you could get any kind of help, which was very smart on his part, was through social media. So at some point, you have to start to. I want to move this around a little bit. I know this light is probably. I might have to do something about this light. I had to plug the phone back in. Probably not going to be good there. So at some point, you're going to have to look at the situation and say, social media was, like, honestly, probably one of the only ways out of this. I think people have learned now that you can use social media as a tool. You don't have to use it to rule your life or ruin your life, but you can actually use it to save your life. And we did that. All of us did that. We came together. We were so loud across the world. People from Portugal and China, all these places were messaging me, telling me how they were so happy that we were helping this girl. They were so happy that we were getting involved like they were. People leaving me messages that I would have never received on any of my other stuff, because some of my other stuff gets controversial sometimes. Yeah, I talk about things that go on in the world from an honest standpoint from me, and honestly, I'm more like in my political views, I'm more middle right. I'm not left and I'm not right. I sit somewhere in the middle, but more on the right side. And people don't like that about me. They're like, well, pick one side or the other. And I get people yelling at me all the time. But because of all this, I've had so much positive support on this channel that is unreal. Just to feel people come together from all over the world and fight for this has been phenomenal. And it's probably been one of the most positive things that I've seen come out of anything social media wise all year. Thank you for what you do, Shelly. I love you for that. I love you as a person that you are. I find that enough people don't respect those that are actually trying to do the right thing and back us as a society to make sure that we're safe and we're taken care of. This whole entire situation has been handled very poorly. But I think from here on out, after the noise that has been made on this whole entire situation, people are going to think twice about making these poor decisions whenever they're looking at a child like this, because they're going to be held accountable. What do we have? What do we have, like, laws and stuff in place for? We have something called the Constitution, right? We can voice as a group, as an assembly. We can protest as an assembly. We can come together as a community, and nobody can stop that. What did we do on social media? It's like all of the world had their own First Amendment right. And we all came together and exercised that right all at the same time on social media and just said, this is not going to happen. This is not okay. Something needs to be done. And guess what? It got done. They got rid of the judge, they got another judge, justice was served, and hopefully it continues to be served. And they keep looking at these situations like they need to, instead of with these biased views. They actually start looking and seeing what the child's saying. Now, I know a lot of times children aren't exactly upfront with how they express themselves, and things could be easily misconstrued. But this was very clear cut here. This girl was terrified. She was traumatized, and she did not want nothing to do with these people at all. There wasn't a shadow of a doubt in my mind the way she reacted to this. This was scripted, enacted, or anything. She was completely terrified. She spoke for herself. She did what she had to do, and honestly, she was the judge and jury here. I appreciate that, Donna. Thank you. So one of the things that we have to consider as well, depending on the level of trauma, it can be I'm going to keep doing it, Shelly. Thank you for what you do as well, though. I appreciate you. Depending on the level of trauma and what type of situation the child was in, they may reject or accept a certain type of therapist. So one of the things that you have to look at as the guardian or the caregiver after that is you have to say, was it a male that she was in contact with that did this to her? Was it a female that she was in contact that did this to her? We're going to have to let her and play off her cues and her body language on what she's okay with. Now, if she was molested by a man, she's probably not going to be okay with seeing a male therapist. If it was a child like me that was abused by a female for years on end, I'm probably not going to be okay with having a female therapist. And in the beginning, I wasn't. I had to see a male therapist for the first 2.5 years of my therapy. And I'm not talking about once a month. This was once every 1 to 2 weeks. I would have to sit down, go over my feelings and stuff, kind of look at everything, how I'm dealing with situations, maybe put some different ways to handle stressful situations in play. We'd get out of the house, we'd get away from my environment and everything, go talk somewhere else where it was just nice and peaceful, like walk around a park or something like that. James he wasn't a therapist. James was like a big brother. James was this big old giant burly guy, he had a beard and stuff like that. He'd pull up in a Chevy Impala with a big old V8 in it, and he'd walk in just like a normal person. He didn't come at you with all this jargon and stuff like that. He was just a therapist. He knew how to handle children. He was one of the best ones that they had. And he didn't come in all dressed up nice. He came in as a normal person, and he made you feel comfortable when you were around him. He didn't talk out of context. He let you guide the conversation. And then when the points were right, when the times were right in the conversation, he might ask some questions here and there. And you didn't realize he was giving you therapy while he was actually giving you therapy. And by the end of the conversation, you felt like 1,000% better, because this dude was trained to do this. He picked up early on how to deal with children like this. He was one of the best therapists I've ever seen, and I wish we could train more therapists like him. He doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. It wasn't something that was scripted off of a piece of paper. It was 100% total well-being of the child, listening to their life, listening to what they have to say, listening to their concerns, and then figuring out based off what they're telling you and how their body language and stuff is, where do we go from here? How do we assess this situation from here? And the dude was smart. He just was a good, caring, loving person, and that's really all it took. I just needed not only just a father-mother figure in my life, but I needed that sense of security. And that therapist alone, for 2.5 years, made such an impact in my life that a lot of people are like, oh, therapy's not going to help. I don't want to do all that. But even at 13 years old, as stubborn as I was and how much I fought not to go through therapy, when I was ready and I started doing it, it was a game changer for me. That first 2.5 years of therapy was one of the most critical steps in me healing from any of this. And then by the time I was done with that 2.5 years, he had got moved up to a higher position because he'd been making such an impact in children's lives. They should have just left him where he was at and just gave him more money. Because can you imagine the amount of children that he could have even further helped because of the type of person that he was? And they could have maybe made him in charge of a department to help train other people to be a therapist like him. You know how many therapists I sat down with and rejected? I want to read this real quick. As an adult survivor, I feel like these last few days I've personally healed through all of the support I've seen go out to Sophie. She is unbelievably brave. So many of us have been failed by the system and left to deal with our own. Thank you for being. I have to be an advocate. I mean, what else can you do when things are falling apart and when the world's falling apart? If you're not trying to do something to make it better, you're the problem. I can't directly say people themselves are the problem. It's just not trying to make a change, not communicating with people, not talking about the things that are going on. Just this dialogue that we have going on right now, and the stories, the messages that people leave me, others are going to come by later and they're going to say, look at all these nice, wonderful things these people have said. Look, and they just start reading. They don't even sometimes go to the video. It's just the dialogue that we have back and forth in the message box and hearing the stories and how people have healed from them. That alone, sometimes it's just enough inspiration for somebody to start doing something. I appreciate that. I'm going to continue to speak out. So, one of the things that children deal with that I think adults, we need to heal. This whole country needs to heal. The whole world needs to heal. I mean, it's ridiculous right now, the amount of, and I'm going through it now. People are attacking me because I'm doing this. People are attacking me because I'm out in public supporting our police officers that are bringing our children home and stuff to us. I literally have Antifa threats on my page because I'm a veteran. I'm a highly trained security guy. I fight for our children. I hold people accountable. I have a huge voice on social media. People are starting to recognize me in public and stuff now. They're hey, you're that keto guy. Yeah, that's me. I'd lost 125 pounds on the keto diet, and I started kind of helping people with their health as I went through my journey as well. And then I was like, I have so many benefits. I have so many attributes that I could offer other people. So why not just talk about everything? If I can help as many people as possible, that should be my goal. And that's what I started doing. So, as the child abuse stuff started to pick up, months ago, then even more people started to recognize me. But now that my voice is really getting out there, and I'm calling these agencies up and I'm talking to them directly and saying, hey, something needs to be done here. There's not going to be a conversation about this. Let's look into see what can be done. This is not something we're going to talk about. Let's get help here. Let's do something here. The people are messaging me and they want to know. And if I have to be the people's voice, I'm going to be the people's voice. And they're messaging me by the hundreds, by the thousands, saying they need answers for this. So we need to come up with some answers. And then people all of a sudden start getting scared and they're like, oh man, maybe we need to do something about this. I called the police department up down in southern Louisiana. And there was an incident that happened down there with a child. And somebody had messaged me privately about it, and somebody else expanded off that. And then it snowballed. Unfortunately, that video got taken down by YouTube because it ended up getting so many views, and there was some kind of gag order put on the parents. So technically the video shouldn't have been out anyway. And I used part of an original video that was put out, so they took it down. It was my fault. But I called up that police department and I was like, look man, I just put this video up like 5 days ago, and this video's already got like 330,000 views. There's gonna be a problem here. If I'm one of the only ones that has a video out, wait until other people put a video out and it's getting millions of views. Can you understand how much pressure that's gonna put on you? Can we get some answers for what's going on? Can you do like a public address on this entire situation? So they addressed it at a local level, and it never got published in the paper or anything like that. It was never on media. But my aunt was down there, And she said, you wouldn't believe the support that came from the community when they started seeing everything that was going on with your videos, with other people's videos and stuff like that, because there was a lot of stuff they didn't even know. But the community came together and hold those parents accountable. And they were like, we grew up with you. We see you every single day. Our kids went to school with you. Our grandparents talked to, and ate dinner with your grandparents. This is not how you raise your kids. This is not okay. We don't do that down here. We take care of our community like it's one big family. If you got stuff going on and you need help, then you need to tell us. But you can't go around beating on your kids and stuff like this and then hiding it from the rest of the community. We all grew up together. If you need help, you tell us you need help. Well, and the community came together and they helped that family out. And all of a sudden the abuse stopped. The kid was able to stay with the family. The mother went and got counseling and stuff like that. The father got counseling. And she said, here we are years later, and they're doing completely fine. It was just a matter of the stress, the financial issues that they were having. They were taking it out on the children, especially one child in particular. But when the community came together because of all the pressure that was put on them from social media, it immediately got addressed. Children are completely fine now. They're going to school. The parents got good jobs and stuff now. People from the community came together and moved them into like big factories that were higher paying jobs, like 20 something dollars an hour instead of what they were making before, $15-16 an hour. And the father actually ended up getting an offshore drilling rig job because one of the supervisors, the superintendent, saw my video and he gave him a job as an entry level, I don't know what you call it, not a roustabout, but a helper. And he ended up getting a job at like $30-31 an hour starting pay. And then within 2 years, he'd moved already up into a full-blown like laborer or something like that, making over $40 an hour. Now the family got a nice house in town. Their kids are taken care of and stuff like that. And it was just a matter of getting people together to figure out what was going on in the situation. So sometimes social media is not a bad thing. It's what ends up helping these families grow sometimes when other people find out what's going on. Like, maybe they're just embarrassed and that's why they don't want to talk about these things. But then the child suffers that embarrassment and how they retaliate in the process for going the lack thereof in their life. So it's a number of things that can come from these situations that social media can benefit. I know it can be bad for some people. For the safety of the child, I know why they put the gag orders and stuff on us. I get it. But it's hard for us to sit by and not say anything and be held in the dark while these situations are going on. Like today, I'm looking for this link for Sophie because, I've heard through the grapevine that I already knew Sophie was with her father. But I heard through the grapevine that the mother actually got arrested. And there's several people that said the boyfriend fled. I'm just looking for some kind of information on that. Everything I click on, it's kind of doesn't really explain that. And where other people are getting that information, I'm not sure. Maybe it was the father did a live tonight with somebody or something like that, and that's where it came from. I don't know. I'm going to move on to the next topic. So a lot of times when you come from abuse, depending on the type of abuse, is it sexual abuse, is it mental abuse, or is it physical abuse? If there are people around that are young, if there are people around that are going to be interacting with that child, it's critical that you let them know ahead of time, especially if it's like brothers or something like that are kind of aggressive, that if it's like a sexual type thing that they dealt with as their abuse, don't screw around like that with her or him. No sexual talk, no poking and touching on the body or anything like that, like brothers and sisters. Do not touch them. Don't say any of those things. Don't mess around like that. Don't be trying to do all the tickling and feeling and stuff like that. Stay away for a little while. Let your sister or your brother tell you down the road that it's okay, but that's not okay right now. Even as the parent, it's not okay. It is not okay. It wasn't okay with me. And I'm sure other children feel the same way. It's very, very important to know the type of abuse that they came from to make sure that you're not interacting something, even in a playful way, that can set them back. So if it's like a sexual type thing, no poking and feeling and saying little perverted stuff or something like that. Even brothers and sisters, I know you can't stop that all the time, but it's very important to put that out. That's not something that's going to help them heal. It could make them feel very uncomfortable. And if it's a, if it's a physical thing, I know brothers and sisters like horsing around and wrestling and stuff like that, but just in the middle of an honest roughhousing session with your brother or something like that, beating up on each other, I mean, it could be just quick, done, just that switch flips. Let it go for a little while, just none of that stuff for a while, and just be conscious of the type of abuse where they came from, because it could be something very, very simple that sets them back off. And I think it's important to realize and recognize that as well. That's something that people need to be conscious of. I understand that children like watching a lot of children's movies, but there's a lot of children's movies that even come across sometimes as sexual. I know you can't sit there 100% of the time and monitor everything that they do, but that's also something important, is to monitor the type of social media interaction that they have. They may not realize it's going on until it's too late and they're already having an episode of some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. They may have a reaction to something that they're watching on TV and you didn't think there was anything wrong with it, but come to find out it's something that actually triggers something that's going on inside their head and makes them remember that type of thing that made them feel uncomfortable before. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect in any of this. But what you can do is you can be better than what you were. And that's the most important part. It's picking up and learning as you go, because if this child's going to be something that you're going to put your time into and you're going to work and mold, you're going to have to do it at their pace. But there's also steps that you're going to have to take that are uncomfortable sometimes. Taking extra time to just observe, to see how they're reacting to things, how movies are bothering them a certain way, or how they're reacting to different types of talk around them and the environment that's around them. Because of my PTSD now in general, I'll go out to these rallies and stuff like that, and I'll watch people, and if something's making them feel uncomfortable, I'll observe from afar. And sometimes people think that I see some kind of threat coming. It's not even that. I'm watching to figure out what's making that person feel uncomfortable. Is there anything that I can do in that situation to possibly make that person feel more comfortable so they don't feel the way that they are at the time? And sometimes you can look at body language and you can figure a lot of that out. So it's being a very observant person in that child's life to figure out how they're dealing with their healing process. An important thing is, it's very hard. It's a subject that nobody's ever okay with, and there's not a lot of people that talk about it. But I'm glad that these little girls are in our lives now, social media wise, and maybe some of you even physically, you get to see them in our hearts, because now it's opened a lot of us up to talking about this type of stuff. I've been trying to speak up for years now. I've been trying to tell my story for years now. I have been on social media telling people about these types of abuses that were out there for years now, but nobody listens. You might get, 100 people that pop up and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry about that, but that's it. Until Sophie and Sloan came along, until these other little girls, and the amount of children getting hurt and killed and stuff in Chicago and all these other big cities, nobody listened. Nobody actually was hearing what the abusive people were saying. The abused people were saying. I would come out and I would tell people some of the most scary things that happened to me that you guys haven't even heard of. And one day we'll sit down and I'll walk you through some of the stuff that happened, just so you know. It may be uncomfortable, but just so you know some of those dark times, what was going on, what triggered it, what the event was like, how I got out of it, and maybe it might help somebody else get out of the same thing. But for years I've been trying to talk about this stuff, and I always knew that eventually this would help somebody. I always knew that eventually I would make an impact in somebody's life, or I could be a voice for somebody. And it was like I was saying and I was screaming at the top of my lungs about the situation at hand, but people just wouldn't listen. It wasn't until these little girls popped up that people actually turned the volume
up and muted everything else and was just listening. Now we have a voice because of these girls. Now we can be an advocate for them and other people like them. Let me read here for a second. I don't actually see my siblings that I cared for. The reason why is I was the one that was abused out of the children that were in the home. And with me being the only one that was abused, they're resentful to me for being the one that went to the police and told the police everything that was going on. And the mom got locked up, and the guy that she was with, that was the big drug kingpin at the time, the right hand man of him, he went off to prison. They blame me for all that. They blame me for the child that went and got help, because they're never the ones that got beat, because they were all her blood kids. I was the only child that was not her blood child. So they resented that. They hated me, and still to this day, here we are 21 years later, and they still hate me in their adult lives. They don't even understand. They don't even attempt to understand. I talked to one of them a few years ago, and she said, her exact words were, "I really effing hate you. I feel like I need to talk to you right now, but I really hate you." I was like, "What's wrong with you? Why do you hate me so much?" "Well, because you got mom put in jail, and we went to foster care for a short period of time before we went back to her, and it's all your fault. We got treated bad by these people." And I was like, what was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to do as a baby, as a child? Why do you hate me so much for going and getting help? What was I really supposed to do? Was I supposed to die? Was I supposed to get passed off to somebody and sex trafficked? Or have my body cut up in pieces when the abuse got so much that eventually they had to kill me and chop me up and bury me somewhere? I mean, what was I supposed to do? They have a lot of hate in their body for me, and they don't like the fact that I went and actually got help. And still to this day, they don't like it. And there's nothing that ever really happened to them. They went to foster care for like 9 months while the court case and everything was going on and the investigation was taken, and they gave the children right back to her. I was the only one that stayed in foster care because I wasn't her blood. I wasn't her kid. And they weren't the ones that ever got beat. It was just me. I mean, they seen the stuff that happened to me, even still to this day. Even in the reports where the police officer, let me paint this picture for you real quick. I was homeless on the streets. I was living in a park. I'd climb over this fence and I'd go all the way to the top of this hill, way, way up. And I had an old nasty blanket that I'd pulled out of a dumpster in an alley behind a Chinese restaurant. And I'd left this blanket up top of this hill with a stone on top of it, big stone, a rock. And I'd go up there and I'd roll up the end of that blanket and I'd flip the other half over and I'd sleep on top of that hill at night, because that's where I felt safe. Higher than everybody else. I could see everybody that was coming at me if somebody was trying to come get me. I was a little kid, so I could climb over that fence real easy and get to the top of that hill. And I'd sleep up there. And I'd look at the stars. And it was the most peaceful thing I'd ever seen in my life. Just laying there. The breeze, the trees flowing back and forth, looking at the smoky sky with the stars all around. And it was almost like a little bit of heaven. And it was calming to me, because I went from being abused and tortured to, I didn't care about being homeless and living on the street and begging for food out of the back of restaurants and stuff like that. I'd go to Aldi's and I would ask people, could I take your groceries to your car for you so I could have the quarter? And I'd put the quarter in my pocket. And I'd do that throughout the day, and that's how I'd make some money. That's how I'd get me a soda pop and a bag of chips or something like that. I'd go run back to the park, and I was fine. I did that forever until I felt like I was probably going to die on the streets, and I went to get help. When I walked into the police station, when I was walking down the street actually, and this young teenager come out from his apartment building. He said, "What are you doing out here, young man?" Mind you, this is a kid himself, but he's much bigger than me at the time. You know, he's 17, I was 13, and I broke down. I started telling him everything that was going on in my life, all the abuse and stuff, and he was like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. We gotta call cops." So I go to the police station, and as soon as I walk into this room, they tell me to turn around, sit down on this. I don't remember if it was a chair, if it was a lower, like a shorter table. And there's a female detective that walks in, and she says, "Here's a gown. Would you mind putting this gown on for me? I'm gonna walk out, let you change, and then I'm gonna come back in." So I was scared, I was terrified, because I didn't know what was about to happen. And I put this gown on, and she comes back in. She asked me to sit down on this table, and she says, "I need you to put your arms out for me and hold your arms up so I can see your body." So I'm standing in front of her, and she said, "Would you mind pulling the top down just to your belly button? I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or anything like that. I just need to see your body." So I pull the gown down to my belly button, and she's bawling her eyes out, and she can't get control of herself. And she starts marking on this paper. She draws a circle, puncture wound, puncture wound, puncture wound, puncture wound, bruise, bruise, burn, scab, not identified, all over my body. My head, my knees, my arms. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't finish it. And she was crying so bad. She put her paperwork down. She walked out, and she asked the male detective to come in and finish, because she couldn't do it. I looked like a medicine doll that somebody was just sticking pins in all over that paper. And I didn't get to see that paper again until I was like 16 years old. I was going through some file paperwork at my parents' house, and I'm going through that file, and I see this envelope. It's sealed and it's double wrapped. It's got like 2 wrappings on it with the little string hook. And I pull this file out, and I start opening this folder, and I see my name, and I pull this chart out of there. And I never seen this chart before. I knew what the lady was doing, but I didn't actually get to see everything that she was marking down. It didn't make sense to me whenever she was making all those circles and marks all over everything, and when she broke down, until I pulled that file out, and that paperwork was in that file. And it looked like somebody, looked like a kid that was trying to draw circles all over the place and fill coloring marks in all over my body. And I didn't even realize it was that bad until I seen that paperwork. I didn't see it until 2.5 years later. Yeah, it's a rough subject. I'm sorry, yo. I try to keep it together, but this stuff is this is what these kids go through. You know, this is the kind of stuff that they deal with, and people they don't even know or they don't want to know. Okay, all right. So that was my entry into foster care. That's what I call my application papers. So, hell of an application paper, I'd say. Now, I'm reading what Manuel said here. I myself am a victim of sexual abuse, and as a little girl, Manuel, is it Manuel? I hope I don't say your name wrong. I apologize. Um, as a little girl, it was so hard to speak up, and when I did, my stepmother failed me. She told me to keep my mouth shut. I was abused by a sheriff, and if whenever I deal with the law enforcement, I start to shake, cry. Stop it. After I spoke up, my mother got custody of me, and my father told me if I went on with charges, he would disown me. I can't even, there's so many stories like this where people just never got help. They were forced to keep their mouth shut. They had their own lifelong gag orders, until those people were long and gone or dead or something like that. They for years on end couldn't say anything, or being something held against them to not say anything, just like you. Thank you all for the support. Now, I could keep going about mine, but I want to go back to these steps right now because I want people that watch this video and at least get everything that I said on here. I've kind of finished off with. He went to prison for 2 years. He was a sheriff. He was isolated those years. I'm really sorry that happened to you. I wish I could create my own organization that I could just go in and stop this stuff from happening immediately. Just sometimes I feel like beating the hell out of these people that do this, but I haven't been good. I haven't been completely good about this whole entire thing. I will confess to you that I did make a mistake one time. And as a little boy, his father were walking through the shop down in Louisiana. They were going through the cereal aisle, and the father was holding his hand. And I'm a big dude, I'm not some little guy or whatever. I'm a pretty hefty guy, powerlifting in the military and stuff like that. If you've seen some of my pictures and stuff like on Facebook and other places, one of my outlets for the abuse and stuff and for the stress was I would go lift weights, and I'm a pretty hefty guy. There's not too many men that I'm really worried about, in life in general, because I'm just not scared of people anymore. After the military and being through all the things that I was, kind of going through all the things that I went through, I don't really get scared of people. There's been so much bad that has happened in my life already. I'm not really a person that gets scared about things. And there was this guy walking down a cereal aisle with his kid, and I was looking for some healthy cereal, and they're starting to walk towards me, and the kid tries to grab what is the the rainbow cereal, whatever, Lucky Charms. The kid tried to grab the Lucky Charms, and the dad yanks him back, right? And this little boy is only like 3 or 4 years old. He yanks him back over there. His arm is flailing and stuff like that. And I can see the bone in his shoulder as he rotates forward. And the kid sees another cereal that he likes. His dad's looking on the other side of the aisle. The kid turns around and grabs the cereal. Now you're walking a kid down a cereal aisle, and you don't think that kid is going to try to grab something if you don't have them in a cart? They're children. They like that kind of stuff. Common sense is a mother, dude. And he's looking at something else on the other side. Kid goes to grab something else again. He yanked that child back, and as soon as he yanked that child back, I grabbed this dude by his chin and I said, "You want to touch him again? Touch him like that again." I said, "I'm not playing with you, dude. It's a child. You do him like that, and you pull their arm out of socket like that, and you hurt him. That is a child. Put him in a cart if you don't want him doing this stuff." I went and grabbed a cart and brought it back to the guy, and I said, "Put your child in the cart." And he put his child in the cart, and the child couldn't reach anything anymore. I said, "Man, it don't make no damn sense to stand here yanking around on him like that. You make yourself look like a fool in front of everybody else, and you embarrass your child, and you hurt them." Now, I was at a bad time in my life when I did that, because I was starting to remember a lot of bad stuff that happened to me as a child. And the guy quit, literally. He understood what I was talking about. Now, here's why that was not a good idea. This is the part where I feel bad. It's not what I did that I feel bad. That part made me feel good. It made me feel good because it wasn't just pulling the kid away. I mean, he was yanking his kid to the point where his child's arm looked like it was stretching and the socket was turned back. And I wasn't about to deal with that stuff. He looked like, I don't know if he may have been a boyfriend or something like that, because that child wasn't responding to him very well. He didn't actually look like there was a connection between him and that child. Like maybe the mom's boyfriend and the child is not his. I'm not sure. It just didn't seem right. Now here's the bad part to that though. Who's to say when that baby didn't leave with that man, if he didn't take out the aggression that he had for me, that he wasn't going to show me, because I would have whooped his ass all over that store on that child. I could have potentially made that situation worse. I should have called the cops. I shouldn't have reacted physically like that, because you could put a child in more danger by doing that. And it was an honest mistake. And still to this day, I don't know what happened to that child. After that, I don't know if that guy, learned a lesson from that. Probably not. But I'm hoping that he didn't leave that store and abuse that child because of a poor decision that I made. It was wrong. And it's, I think about that decision all the time. And I try to remind myself that you can't act that way, because when you do act that way, you could potentially put that child in more danger, because you're not walking out of that store with them and saying, "Well, this is my child. Now I'm going to take care of him right for the rest of his life." You could have made it worse. Should have just called the cops. Or reported the family privately. See if you can figure out who they are or something like that. But that's one thing that I want to say to people as well. When you see that stuff going on, sometimes you do have to act, especially if it's like the child's life in danger. But in a situation like that, I acted poorly. It was just that anger coming out of me, and I should not have done that. Now, when children come out of abusive situations, they may not be okay with being in a public environment right away. So like me, I was kept at home for almost 2.5 years, locked away taking care of children. So when I was put into foster care, they wanted to put me in school right away. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to be around a bunch of kids and stuff right away. That's not something that I would have done. I would not have been in a very good environment. I needed to get acclimated to family and stuff again, people that were actually caring for me. So to take a child out of an abusive home like that has been locked away for long periods of time, raising 2 kids basically on my own, and that she had 3 of her other kids, which I don't speak about them because they're some of the ones that blame me for everything that happened with her. And how could you blame a child for trying to get help? So you may have to homeschool that child for a little bit if you can, or you may have to pay for some kind of private lessons or something in that instance. That's a hard situation because how do you justify that? You can't stay home with them all the time. You're going to have to try to identify in that situation whether or not they're ready for that type of environment. And sometimes they are. Sometimes that's what they need. They need to be around other kids that are like them, that will help them heal by showing them how to actually be a child, because they probably forgot how to because of their environment. But then again, it could make situations worse. And for me, it was kind of bad for about the first 6 months. So I was like homeschooled, private school, like private teacher teaching me until I started getting into everything. My foster mother, African American lady, most beautiful woman in the world, sassy as hell. She, Miss Gloria Jean Johnson, she put me in saxophone lessons, clarinet lessons. She wanted me to be as active as I wanted to be, to keep my mind off of everything and heal. And this woman, she knew how to take care of you. She knew how to love you. She knew how to deal with abused and battered children. She was the perfect fit. She was an emergency placement. There was no other people to take me at the time. So when DCFS had to find somebody, they called Miss Johnson up and said, "Hey, look, I understand you live on 63rd and Green, and it's not a nice area, but we need a favor from you. We got this little boy. He ain't got nowhere to go. We need a family for him for right now." And she didn't hesitate, not a one bit. She didn't hesitate at all. She said, "You bring me that little baby over here. Bring him over here. Come, bring him to my house." So they took me over. They went out and got me some clothes and stuff like that. Seeking my own room upstairs. There's a little weight room down in the bottom. She said, "You go down there and lift some weights, whatever you want." My son's got some basketballs and stuff down there. You can you could go down there and I'm not sure what that means. What is that? Dude, I'm with you. I'm not sure what that means, man. She said you can go down there, you can get any of the basketballs, any of the sport equipment stuff. We got a basketball court right down the street here. It was just the perfect environment for me to start healing in. So that was good. Thank you, I appreciate that. So, it's a matter of the type of environment they come from to where they're going. So they may not be ready to be in a public environment where there's a lot of students and stuff like that. That may terrify them. So that's a situation that you have to try to assess too, and figure out, if you're a foster parent, whether or not you have the ability to take on that child. And if you don't have the ability to take on that child, is DCFS or CPS or Catholic Charities going to be able to help you with a private teacher for that child, for maybe a couple weeks, a couple months or something like that, until they get acclimated to getting back into the swing of things. And then there's also that part of that child's life that may be terrifying, putting them back into a public environment and then being out of school for so long, and then they have to pick up textbooks and read and study and stuff like that. So how does a child that went from abuse, getting tortured and basically battered physically and mentally, and then you take them and you throw them into a public school and you say, have at it, especially if they've been out of school. I know a lot of these children were still going to school, but I was out of school for a long time. You have to look at each one of these situations individually. So one of the most important things for me healing was, I didn't like people bringing up my past. I didn't like people bringing up what happened to me in the past. I wanted to bring that up when I was ready to bring that up. So I think it's important that people realize if that child's not ready to talk about something, if they're not coming to you asking you questions about something, you probably should leave that alone. Okay. I appreciate that. That's why I took a step back and I was trying to give you the opportunity to respond, because sometimes I get attacked on here. I get in the middle of these videos and stuff like that, and so it's very difficult to bring up the past from a child that's been abused. Let them do that. Please don't do that to them. You don't understand what that could do. I mean, you're talking about, it could be an almost immediate chemical imbalance immediately in the brain. So the body fires off chemical signals. The body interprets things just like an automobile does. The body interprets things just like a computer does. It sends out packets of information. They're either 10 10 10 11 10 0 11 0 0 0 1 0. You know, so it interprets things this way. That's how it knows what's being communicated back and forth. And if you go through a traumatic event and then all of a sudden your brain, you get automatically put in that fight or flight system. It reacts based on chemical signals. Those hormones that are being fired based on the situation and how your body interprets them, you don't know what's going to happen. You bring up somebody's past or a traumatic event or something they've dealt with, or let somebody in the household pick on them for something that has happened. You might have a war at your hand, a war on your hands that you don't even realize you're not even ready to deal with. Because that could be just quick, boop, traumatic response, and now you've got a war demon that you're having to calm down. Let them bring that up. They know how to bring it up. Their body adjusts for them to be put in that situation if they're the one that brings it up. If somebody else brings it up, it's traumatizing. It's such a traumatic event that happened that happened in their life, and it's so personal to them that they've reserved the rights to that, the copyright to that. And until they get, later on years in a place in their life where they could openly talk about that and you can bring those things up, you don't even reserve the right to that page to flip it open and even speak about it. They'll let you know when it's okay. They will bring it up when it's okay. Let them be the guide on that. Don't bring up a lot of the stuff from the past and try to question or use it against them, because you will create an enemy. And if you really cherish and love that child, that's something that you'll stay away from because it is traumatic. Let them do it. I want to go back to the comments real quick. My dad was a tyrant, incest, and serious emotional abuse. Always called stupid when I was a straight A student, but was in National Honor Society. Tried to take me out of scholarship to college for having a boyfriend. So many kids are being abused, they're voiceless. They don't know about CPS. I never heard of it until I was in my 30s. California is trying to pass a law that a child of age 4 can give sexual consent. So, I don't know if we want to get into that video right now. I don't even know if I want to touch that subject right now, just for the simple fact that, we may have this video for children and people to learn from in the future, but I do want to talk about that, JT. I do want to talk about exactly what you just brought up, though, and I want to beat that hard and teach people about that and the fact that that is not okay, and what that could do to society if that's made okay. So just because we can see each other and we can see the comments that's going on right now, um, I'm acknowledging you right now. I'm nodding my head saying we are going to communicate about that. But I'm not going to bring that up on this video because I want children and adults to possibly be able to come back to this video and learn about the stuff we're talking about right now. But we're going to get into that. That's something that I have to try to rip that up because that's sick. It's not okay at all. The last part that I have on my notes is something that is probably going to throw you guys off. And you're going to be like, what is this? What is this guy even talking about? And I need you to pay attention to here, and I need you to understand the sincerity behind what I'm saying. I'm not saying I'm okay with any of this. I'm not saying that I'm even advocating this. But what I'm saying is I'm thinking about it from a child's perspective. What do you think is going to happen to, say, a young boy, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that's been being beat by his mother consistently, every day, all the time? Do you think that he's going to have a very strong attraction to women? Do you think that after he gets out of this situation, depending on the level of trauma, that that he's going to be okay with being able to deal with a woman right away? That he's not going to feel any discomfort because of the trauma that's been induced by a specific woman in his life that's now being, that now in his mind he's judging other women because of what she did? As a child, it's hard to be able to tell the difference between what you should do and what you shouldn't do because you haven't developed a lot of that yet. So children are going to come out of situations sometimes with a gender preference. Now hear me out when I say this. I've known of children in the past that have been abused so bad by women that they actually end up being attracted to men further on in their life because of the trauma that's happened with a woman and they never recovered from it. And a lot of people don't understand why this is. Well, I'm going to tell you why this is. When your preferences change because of the trauma that you've dealt with, sometimes it's not reversible. Sometimes you can't go back and say, well, that child's gay, that's not right, that's not Christian-like, that's not up to you. A child has developed something in his life that has made him switch, or her switch, because of who they are abused by. And a lot of times this is not reversible. You know, growing up, there was a girl that I was friends with. Her name was Heather. And I was always the kind kid to everybody growing up because of what happened to me. I didn't want to be mean to other people. I always wanted to fight the people that were being mean to other people. I always wanted to stand up for the geeks and the non-popular people in school. And even when I became popular playing football and stuff like that, I would still always go sit with the people that were doing the Yu-Gi-Oh cards and, you know, playing the little geeky games and stuff like that. I would always hang out with them because I felt like I was more, those were more my people than the cool people were. I just didn't really feel good around the cool people, even though I was kind of popular. I wasn't like, I was one of the better football players, the more aggressive football players, because I used everything that happened to me in the past on the football field, and I would just smash people like crazy. I would take guys out of the game because of how I would take all that anger that was built up into me and I would just dump it in the field. I would dump it on people. And sometimes maybe it was unfair. Maybe it wasn't. It's football, you know? And I would go over, actually it wasn't Heather, it was Amber. Her name was Amber. And me and Amber were sitting down at the kitchen table one night, and her dad came down and her mom came down, and her mom's smiling at Amber and Amber's smiling back. And the mom says, "Really, Amber?" And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And Amber kind of nodded her head a little bit. And I looked really confused. And mind you, we just rode bikes together and stuff like that. We were 14, 15 years old. No, later on in life. We started to be friends at 14, 15 years old. This was like 17 years old. I was 17, she was 16. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. So much has happened in my life. And they're kind of giving each other cues back and forth. And Amber's a cute girl. You know, she even still to this day is a grown woman. She's like, you look at her and you're like, damn, girl, fine, you know, kind of one of them things. But at 17 years old, I didn't know how to act around women. You know, I'd been so much bad had happened to me. I wasn't really interested in being around or having a girlfriend. Well, Amber, when I was confused about the signals, the looks the two of them were giving each other back and forth, Amber said, I like you, Rich. I think you're a really nice guy. I think you're a very attractive guy. And I've liked you for a long time. I just didn't know how to tell you. And I didn't know what to say. You know, going from what I had been through and never actually been taught that type of how to respond to stuff like that as a teenager, I just kind of got red and got quiet. And she said it's okay. But she said, here's the thing. I'm actually gay. And I was like, wait a second. You like girls? And she was like, yeah, I like girls, but you're the only guy I like. And the reason you're the only guy I like is because you make me feel really comfortable around you. You don't pressure me to do anything. You make me feel good about myself. You're always a great friend. And you're teaching me not to be against men, and not to think all men are going to abuse me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, when I was 13 years old, I first started dating another 13-year-old boy. And when his parents weren't around and my parents weren't around and we were away from everybody, when I wouldn't do something that he wanted me to do, he would beat the shit out of me. And it was something that kept happening. And then I never told nobody anything about it. And, you know, later on, I got another boyfriend, 14 years old. And I didn't know what it was about young boys that thought it was okay to hit girls. Who teaches them that? It's not okay. But she said my other boyfriend I had, the same thing happened, except it got worse. He bloodied my nose one day, he busted my lip, and my mom and my dad found out about it. My dad went looking for him. The kid ran away, came back to his parents' house. They moved him down to Texas with his uncle. And she said, I haven't liked a man since then. I've been so insecure a boy. I've been so insecure around men since then that I've actually had 2 other girlfriends. And she says, I really am gay. I really like women because I'm just super comfortable around them, but I'm not comfortable around any guys. But when I'm around you, I don't feel that way. I feel like I care about you, like I could be in a relationship with you, like I feel differently about you than I do other men. So the reason I bring that situation up is me and her actually never dated. We kissed a few times and stuff like that. We were younger, you know, and she was a great girl. She's still a great girl today. And mind you, you know, I'm 34 years old. Back then, she was smoking hot. And now, she's still smoking hot. She still looks like she's like 25 years old. And we're both the same age. But it was like 4 or 5 years ago. We were talking on Facebook, and she said, "Man, you know, you're still the same guy I knew back in the day, and I'm still gay, but I'd be all over you in a heartbeat." And I was like, "Really? You still feel that way?" And she said, "I don't know what it is. I just don't trust men, but I trust you. I just really trust you, and I'm attracted to you, and it's something different. It takes a different kind of person to be able to snap somebody out of that shell." So the reason I bring that situation up is sometimes people live with that for a lifetime. It could be a one traumatic event. It could be many long traumatic events. But a child that's dealing with abuse as a child, a young teenager, whatever it is, that could potentially change the outcome of their life partner. Then it's always a sensitive subject because people don't want to hear that. But it's the truth. It could be very specific, small traumatic events that make that happen, or it could be elongated, not so serious traumatic events, but multiple over the years, or it could just be one big giant monstrous devilish action for years on end. It's not up to you to decide whether or not that child is right or wrong for doing that. It happens sometimes. Chemical imbalances, hormone changes, the comfort levels, the fight or flight systems that react, cortisol release. They may not be as impactive on them around the same sex of the abuser that they had. So if you had like a little boy or a little girl that was being abused by the same sex for so long, or opposite sex, whatever, they may end up, like a little boy getting abused by his mom all the time. He may end up actually later on in life realizing that he's more comfortable around men and that he would actually rather have a partner in life that is a man and not a woman, because he still feels uncomfortable around women. And they could find that out at 13, 14, 15 years old. You never know. And that's something that you have to expect in these situations. It's something that happens. It's not an uncommon thing. And you're going to have to be okay with it. If you love them and you care for them and you want the best for them, sometimes they'll grow out of it and they'll be fine after they, get through some therapy and stuff like that. And a lot of times they realize that's what was meant for them anyway, or that's how they feel. Yeah. What my opinion on that is irrelevant. My opinion on is that right or wrong doesn't hold any water in this talk at all. It's just talking about the facts and what I've seen in my life and how I've dealt with other people and seen other people come out of this stuff, what could potentially happen. And the main thing is being okay with it, being understanding and acceptive of it, and just realize the type of post-traumatic stress that they're dealing with. I would hope that people would try every intervention possible rather than going straight to medication, but medication is not always out of the question either. There's a lot of times where medication does help children, but it should be only a last resort. I would strongly disagree with it across the board pretty much. But some children do have to be medicated because there's so much bad trauma. I don't like that. I don't even want to accept it. It just makes me feel bad even saying that. But unfortunately, the truth is the truth. Sometimes the trauma is so bad, in order for them to start to come out of that event and what they're still holding on to, medication may, in small forms, may have to be used. That's it for my notes, guys. I don't have anything else on there right now. Just to kind of breeze over it real quick, it was be conscious of the barriers. Let the child decide whether or not it's a big barrier or it's going to be a small barrier. The therapy, immediately or wait, you're going to have to gauge that based on how the child reacts to you and the new situation put in play. Sometimes you can start them in therapy immediately, and sometimes they may feel comfortable waiting a little bit longer to get adjusted to everything. Just all depends. It's something that you have to be conscious of. And then you have to pay attention to whether or not they're more comfortable with a male therapist or a female therapist or a counselor. They may be often on guard. So just realize they may be waiting for a reaction. They may be ready for that. Good night, Donna. And just try to keep the things that make them feel uncomfortable to a minimum. The sexual talk, the touching and feeling play and stuff like that, especially with other little kids. It's probably going to be more accepted with other little kids. But as an adult, that might make them feel kind of uncomfortable. But keep that stuff to a minimum. Or not at all, preferably. I know you can't be there 100% of the time, all the time, but it's critical that stuff, whatever was happening before, doesn't continue as play to be made as normal through the therapy part of it, of the healing. School may be trauma. There are many different types of therapy. Like she said, talk therapy didn't work for her. Mine wasn't so much talk therapy as much as it was making the person wasn't just talking to me. It wasn't like in a chair sitting back. We actually went out and did things, walked around a park, went and played basketball together, he let me gear the conversation. I didn't have to ask, or I didn't have to answer a bunch of questions, because he was just good. He just knew exactly what to do and how to interject when he needed to interject, and make changes when he needed to make, or suggestions, stuff like that. Don't bring up the past. Let the child bring it up when they're ready. They're going to be better at preparing themselves for it than you are, bringing it up and startling them and creating could be a disastrous event inside their head. So don't do that. Understanding and reassuring that if they do make a gender preference of a partner or somebody that they want to date or that they're interested in, you don't criticize them for that, because of the type of trauma that they went through. They may be attracted. It may be a boy attracted to another boy. But I think at the same time you have to be critical about that other person as well. You may have to actually interject and say, hey, this is okay, but don't make Robbie feel or Jeff feel uncomfortable. It's kind of one of those situations. Maybe when the time is right, you could maybe a little education in there on what's okay and what's not okay. But you can't stop them from liking who they like, because the trauma plays a huge role in that. And then PTSD, just understanding the type of trauma and the disorder that they're dealing with, and it's going to take years to heal, and it's probably never going to completely go away. As you've seen here tonight, I broke down and I was getting to the point where I start crying like a baby. I'm lucky I pulled back the reins a little bit. I let a few little droplets out, but that's it. That's really all I had. I'm going to go back and check the last few messages. Well, is there anything that you guys want to bring up before we get off of here? I'll wait about 30 seconds to see if anybody else has got any other questions. I think the next topic that I'm going to talk about is how children with special conditions react based on emotional responses from us, like children that may have chemical imbalances, and how adults don't understand those chemical imbalances and can potentially make the reactions worse. Like, there's a lot of adults that think that they whoop their kid's ass and that's going to fix the problem. No, it's probably not going to fix the problem. In a lot of situations, you're probably going to make the situation worse, and here's why. Kind of one of those talks, especially if there's something actually medically wrong with them. It's not always the answer, and there's a rebound effect where they also want to get revenge for you acting the way that they did, and they'll find another way to do it. And it's probably going to be sometime in that instance that it happens, and it's going to be bad. So that's it, guys. I'm gonna lay down and get a few hours of sleep before I gotta go to work. I wanted to get this off my chest. I get about 5 hours of sleep, I'll be all right. I'm good. All right, guys, I'm jumping off of here. I hope you guys have a good night. Sleep well, and I love you all. Be blessed. Remember, this world's crazy right now. We gotta take care of one another, and if we're not doing that, who's gonna do it? Nobody else is gonna do it for us if we're not doing it ourselves. That's really all we have right now, honestly. It's just love. That's it. That's the only way that this stuff is gonna be fixed. It's love. Y'all have a good night. Take care. See you tomorrow.